She wasn't used to fancy places. Most of her time was spent juggling house chores, grocery runs, and the occasional coffee with a neighbor. But that night felt different. Her husband had made a reservation at a well-known restaurant downtown, something they almost never did. She took her time getting ready, putting on her best dress and a bit of makeup, hoping to feel seen. Her clothes weren't designer, just a soft blue dress she had saved for special occasions. Her shoes were worn but clean, and she had brushed her hair carefully, pinning it back the way her husband liked. She didn't look glamorous, but she looked like herself, gentle, honest, and full of hope. This dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a small escape, a way to feel appreciated. They didn't have much money to spare, so going out like this meant something. It meant they were making an effort, that even in the middle of bills and worries, they could pause and enjoy life together. As they walked into the restaurant, she held her husband's arm with a quiet pride. She didn't need attention. She just wanted to be happy for a night. But even before they were seated, she could feel it. The glances, the whispers, the small, judging looks from other tables. It stung more than she expected. She hadn't come here to be noticed, yet somehow she already felt out of place. Still, she smiled gently and sat down, determined to enjoy the evening. She had no idea what was coming. As they walked in, the receptionist gave them a quick once-over before directing them to their table. The glance was subtle but dismissive, as if they didn't quite fit the image of the usual patrons. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for her to feel small, to sense that she wasn't welcomed the way others might be. She tried to shake it off, focusing on her husband's reassuring smile. Once seated, the waitress came over with a forced politeness, her gaze never quite meeting the woman's eyes. Instead, the waitress directed all her attention to the husband, asking him what they'd be drinking, and barely acknowledging his wife's presence. The small talk felt cold, the comments pointed, offering recommendations to him, speaking to him as if she was the only one who mattered in that moment. The woman's heart sank a little with each word. When the waitress did look at her, it was only to make a quick remark about the choice of the dish she'd ordered, as if it were beneath her. "Are you sure you want that? You might want to try something a bit classier," she said, her tone dripping with subtle disdain. The woman didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to draw attention, but it stung. Was it really that obvious that she didn't belong here? Her husband remained unaware of the quiet cruelty until the end of the exchange. He noticed the coldness, the way the waitress never once looked directly at his wife, and how the woman's smile had begun to fade. But she didn't say anything, not wanting to spoil the evening. Still, the unease lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't wanted there. The night was meant to be special, but the air felt heavy. As the couple waited for their meal, her mind drifted. The sleek, polished restaurant around her felt like a world she'd never truly belonged to. She couldn't help but think back to her childhood, growing up in a small, modest home where every meal was a simple affair. Nothing fancy, just enough to get by. The memories flooded her mind like an uninvited guest, and with them came a wave of insecurity she thought she had long since buried. She remembered her mother in the kitchen, always working with what little they had. No matter how hard she tried to hide it, there was always a sense of shame that accompanied their dinners. Even as a child, she had learned to feel embarrassed by the things other families took for granted. Their fancy dishes, their expensive foods, and the luxury of never worrying about where their next meal was coming from. It was as if that simple, humble past was always lurking in the background, never truly gone. Tonight, it wasn't just the fancy plates or the luxurious setting that stung. It was the subtle reminders that she wasn't part of this world. Her thoughts turned darker as she sat there, noticing the way the other diners looked at her and her husband, judging them without saying a word. The waitress's cold treatment only amplified her feelings, reminding her of that ever-present tension between the person she was and the person she'd always hoped to become. She had worked so hard to escape that life, but sometimes it felt like it still held her in its grasp. As she glanced at her husband, trying to find solace in his presence, she couldn't help but wonder if he, too, saw her as someone out of place. Maybe this was how it would always be. Maybe, no matter how far they'd come, Her past would always define her. Her hands nervously fidgeted with the napkin, and a lump formed in her throat. It was supposed to be a celebratory night, but all she could feel was the weight of her past staring back at her. As the silence lingered, her husband glanced at her, sensing something was off. She was quiet, too quiet. He could usually tell when something was bothering her, but tonight, there was a different kind of distance in her eyes. His concern grew as he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly, his voice laced with care. She quickly pulled her hand away, offering him a quick, forced smile. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said, her voice betraying the unease she was feeling. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the truth either. She didn't want to bring him down with her emotions, especially not tonight. This was supposed to be their night to enjoy, to celebrate how far they had come. She was determined not to ruin it. Her pride, something she had carried with her all her life, was telling her to push through. She had learned long ago that showing vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. In her world, strength meant swallowing the hurt, pretending it didn't exist, and carrying on. She had gotten good at hiding her feelings, especially when she knew they would only cause worry. Tonight, she would not be the one to cause tension. Her husband wasn't convinced, but he respected her space. He knew she could be stubborn when it came to her emotions. So he let it go, though the unease in the pit of his stomach remained. He knew her better than anyone, and even if she wouldn't admit it, he could feel that something had changed. The question was, what was it? As the last of their meal was cleared, the waitress returned to the table. With a smirk that she couldn't hide, she casually placed the check down in front of them. "It's sweet that your husband brought you out," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You must not get to places like this often." The words hit the woman like a slap in the face. It wasn't just a comment. It was a judgment, and it was spoken loud enough for other patrons to hear. Her heart sank as she felt every set of eyes in the restaurant shift towards her. She had been used to people looking at her differently, but this was different. The shame flooded her, and she instinctively looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. It was like a wave of humiliation crashing over her, threatening to pull her under. She tried to hold back the sting in her eyes, but the hurt was undeniable. Her husband tensed beside her, sensing the shift in her mood, but she could feel the weight of the moment crushing her, even though she had tried so hard to shield him from it. The last thing she wanted was for him to get involved, to make a scene. But inside, she was crumbling. The waitress's comment wasn't just about the restaurant. It was a reminder of everything she had fought so hard to escape, being seen as less than unworthy of respect. The silence at the table was thick, and the tension in the air was palpable. The woman kept her head lowered, the embarrassment lingering like a dark cloud above her. All she wanted was to leave, to disappear, and pretend the moment had never happened. But as much as she wanted to shrink away, she couldn't. This wasn't just a moment of humiliation. It was a turning point, and she wasn't going to let it define her. The air in the restaurant grew tense, as the quiet after the waitress's cruel comment seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without a word of warning, her husband stood up. His movements were slow but deliberate, his face a calm mask, as if he had already made up his mind about what needed to be done. The woman, still processing the sting of humiliation, looked up in confusion as he locked eyes with the waitress. "Actually," he said, his voice steady and confident, "my wife owns this place." The words hit like a thunderclap. The entire dining room fell silent, the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation stopping instantly. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't what she expected, and she had no idea where this was going. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze in time. The waitress's face turned pale, her eyes flicking nervously between the husband and wife. She stammered, clearly caught off guard by his words. "Wait, what?" she managed to say, her sarcasm evaporating into nervousness. The woman, still trying to comprehend the situation, felt a rush of mixed emotions. Surprise, embarrassment, but also a strange sense of pride starting to build inside her. Her husband wasn't just standing up for her. He was taking charge of the moment. The other diners were now watching, the silence hanging in the air. The woman could feel the weight of their stares, but she couldn't look away from her husband. He didn't flinch, didn't show any hesitation. He stood tall and firm, his words echoing louder than any of the previous insults. For the first time that evening, the woman felt seen, not as someone to be belittled, but as someone who deserved respect. And in that moment, everything changed. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then, with a deep breath, her husband continued, his voice calm yet unwavering. "I didn't just buy this place," he said, turning towards his wife with a soft smile. "I bought it as a surprise for her, because this has always been her dream. She's always wanted to own something like this, something special." The words hung in the air, and the room seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the full revelation. The woman's heart raced as she listened, her mind struggling to keep up with his confession. For years, she had hidden her aspirations, thinking they were too big or too out of reach for someone like her. But here was her husband, standing in front of everyone, revealing her deepest dreams as if they were something worth celebrating. The waitstaff and patrons were now completely silent, their eyes shifting between the couple as the truth began to sink in. He continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "She's the strongest, most generous, and most deserving person I know," he said with complete sincerity. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time that evening, the woman felt truly valued, not just by her husband but by everyone around her. It was as if, in that moment, all her hard work and sacrifices were finally being recognized. As her husband spoke, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The patrons, once quiet with judgment, now looked on with admiration. The waitress, still frozen in place, seemed to realize the gravity of what had just been shared. The woman could feel her past doubts fading away. Her dreams were no longer just dreams. They were real, and they were hers. She wasn't just the wife sitting at a table in a fancy restaurant. She was a woman who had worked hard, sacrificed, and made her dreams come true. And everyone was about to see that. For the first time in what felt like forever, the woman felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. True recognition. It wasn't about the wealth or the status that her husband's words had just revealed, but about something much deeper. She felt valued, seen, and understood for who she truly was. Someone who had worked tirelessly, overcome countless obstacles, and always put others before herself. It was a feeling that had eluded her for years, but now it was impossible to ignore. As she looked around the room, something incredible happened. The patrons, who had once dismissed her, now looked at her with a newfound respect. They weren't just seeing her as a simple woman anymore. They were seeing her as the strong, determined person she had always been. Their expressions had shifted from judgment to admiration, and that shift made all the difference. She realized in that moment that her worth wasn't determined by where she sat or how she was treated. It was defined by her character, her heart, and the life she had built. Her eyes welled up with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of shame or hurt. They were tears of relief and pride. She had spent so many years trying to prove her worth to the world, hiding her vulnerabilities and downplaying her dreams. Now, in the most unexpected of places, she was finally being recognized for who she truly was. Her husband's words had unlocked a door she hadn't even realized was closed, a door to her own sense of self-worth. As she smiled, the tears threatening to fall, she felt a strength deep inside her that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. She didn't need the approval of strangers or the validation of those who doubted her. What mattered was that she knew who she was and what she had achieved. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with it all, strong, proud, and completely seen. The air in the restaurant was thick with tension, and the once chatty ambience fell silent. The waitress, now visibly embarrassed, slowly approached their table. Her eyes dropped to the floor as she apologized in a quiet, shaky voice. "I'm so sorry," she said, her words barely above a whisper. She was clearly shaken by the truth her actions had just uncovered, and the weight of it was evident in her expression. The woman looked up at the waitress, her heart softening despite the lingering sting of the earlier humiliation. She had been hurt, but she knew that everyone was capable of learning and growing. She took a deep breath, offering a gentle smile before responding. "It's okay," she said, her voice calm. "But remember this, always treat people with respect. You never know who they are or what they've been through." The waitress stood still, her face turning red with embarrassment as the woman's words sank in. It was a humbling moment for her, one that would stick with her for a long time. She had assumed things about the woman sitting before her, all based on appearances. But now, she understood that there was so much more beneath the surface, so many stories untold. Her mistake was a harsh lesson in judgment, one she wouldn't soon forget. The woman didn't need to say more. Her message had been clear, and the sincerity in her voice carried more weight than any reprimand. As the waitress nodded quietly and walked away, she knew she had learned something far more important than how to serve a table. She had learned the value of humility and respect, and how one simple encounter could change her perspective forever. Rather than letting the humiliation eat at her, she transformed that painful moment into an opportunity for growth. The experience in the restaurant had opened her eyes to how often people like her were judged or overlooked. Instead of harboring resentment, she decided to take action. She realized that she could use her newfound success to make a real difference for other women who had faced similar struggles. It was time to break the cycle of judgment and give others a chance to rise. She launched a training program aimed at empowering women who had been through tough times, just like she had. The program focused on providing practical skills, emotional support, and career opportunities. Her mission was simple: to give women a platform where they could find strength, gain confidence, and build better futures. But it wasn't just about the training. She actively sought out single mothers, women from humble backgrounds, and those who, like her, had felt invisible. She knew their potential because she had lived it. As her business grew, so did her desire to uplift others. She started hiring these women, offering them jobs with fair pay, mentorship, and the chance to grow. It was more than just a career opportunity. It was a chance to reclaim their dignity, to show the world that they were more than their pasts. With each woman she hired, she saw her vision of empowerment come to life. These women didn't just work for her. They became a part of her story, a story of strength, resilience, and solidarity. Her story, once one of being overlooked, now became a symbol of hope and change. What had started as a hurtful moment in a restaurant had blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. She turned her pain into purpose, and in doing so, created a ripple effect of transformation that reached far beyond her own life. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment that turned into an opportunity for growth? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you found this story inspiring, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Millionaire Breakthrough community. You won't want to miss more powerful stories of transformation and success. See you in the next video.